If you enjoy my channel, please give me a like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you so much.
Tiny apartment, big silence. What if your dream life finally arrives, and instead of happiness, all you hear is silence? That question hit me on my third night in America while standing inside a tiny apartment kitchen at 2 in the morning. Eating cold rice straight from a plastic container because we still didn't own a dining table. Romantic, right? The American dream. Very cinematic. Except the apartment smelled like old paint, the heater made sounds like a dying robot, and outside the window, snow kept falling like the world had pressed the mute button on my entire life. I used to imagine the United States differently. Bigger. Brighter. Faster. In my mind, America looked like movie scenes with giant supermarkets, smiling neighbors, perfect English conversations, and people confidently ordering coffee with complicated names that sounded like chemistry experiments. But reality felt smaller than my suitcase. The apartment had one bedroom, thin walls, and a refrigerator that buzzed louder than my confidence. And confidence, mine disappeared fast. Especially when English entered the room. You know that strange moment when your brain suddenly forgets every English word you studied for years? Someone asks, "How are you doing today?" and your mind responds with the emotional stability of a potato. That was me. Every day. Back home, I thought my English was okay. Then I arrived in the United States and discovered that real-life English moves like a speeding train with no subtitles. Americans smiled, talked quickly, used slang I had never heard before, and somehow turned simple sentences into audio puzzles. One cashier asked me, "Paper or plastic?" I panicked so hard I almost answered with my blood type. The funny part? This happens to many people learning English. Psychologists call it language anxiety. Your brain treats communication like danger. The amygdala, the tiny alarm system inside your head, reacts to embarrassment the same way it reacts to physical threats. So when you fear speaking English incorrectly, your body quietly enters survival mode. Your heart beats faster. Your memory weakens. Your thoughts crash into each other like shopping carts in a Walmart parking lot. Basically, your nervous system becomes dramatic for no reason. And the worst part wasn't even the mistakes. It was the silence afterward. My husband worked long hours during those first months. I spent entire days alone in the apartment listening to the heater click on and off like a slow metronome. Morning light entered through cheap blinds. Cars passed outside. Somewhere upstairs, somebody vacuumed aggressively every afternoon like they were fighting personal demons through carpet cleaning. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen counter replaying English videos again and again. Hello. How are you? Nice to meet you. Simple sentences. Tiny sentences. Yet they felt heavy in my mouth. At one point, I stopped practicing completely for almost 2 weeks. Not because I was lazy. Because disappointment is exhausting. Nobody really talks about this part of moving abroad. Social media shows airport photos, coffee shops, shopping malls, and smiling couples holding hands under Christmas lights. Nobody uploads videos crying quietly in a bathroom because they forgot how to explain themselves at a pharmacy. Loneliness changes time. Minutes stretch. Days blur together. Even motivation becomes slippery. And here's the strange thing about human psychology. When people feel emotionally overwhelmed, the brain naturally avoids difficult tasks. That includes language learning. Your mind chooses comfort instead of challenge because survival feels more important than growth. So instead of practicing English, you scroll videos. You snack. You stare at the ceiling pretending you're resting. Meanwhile, your dreams sit quietly in the corner wearing pajamas. One rainy afternoon, I remember looking around that apartment and wondering if we had made a mistake. The sofa was secondhand. The microwave only worked if you slammed the door twice. We counted coins before grocery shopping. Sometimes my husband and I whispered about bills late at night because stress sounds louder in small apartments. But something unexpected happened during those difficult weeks. I started noticing tiny beautiful things. Not dramatic movie moments. Small ones. Like the old woman downstairs who always smiled at me even though we could barely communicate. Or the sound of children laughing outside after school. Or the way American grocery stores sold 20 different types of cereal for reasons nobody fully understands. Slowly, I began carrying a notebook everywhere. Every new English word went inside it. Receipt. Laundry. Sidewalk. Appointment. Not textbook English. Real-life English. And something fascinating happens when language connects to emotion and memory. Neuroscience studies show that people remember vocabulary better when words are attached to personal experiences. That's why you forget random vocabulary lists but remember the exact sentence somebody said during an emotional moment 5 years ago. Emotion is glue for memory. So instead of memorizing difficult grammar rules all day, I started learning English through life itself. At the supermarket, I listened carefully to conversations near me. At home, I repeated phrases slowly while cooking dinner. Sometimes I talked to myself in broken English while washing dishes like a confused motivational speaker. This plate is very clean today. Honestly, the plate probably felt proud. Little by little, English became less like an exam and more like a bridge. A shaky bridge. A weird bridge. But still a bridge. One night, after another long snowy evening, my husband came home carrying a tiny lamp he found on sale. We placed it near the window because the apartment always felt dark after sunset. Suddenly the whole room changed. The light was soft and warm. The tiny apartment looked less sad. I still remember sitting there quietly thinking something almost ridiculous. Maybe happiness doesn't arrive all at once. Maybe it sneaks in slowly through small moments people usually ignore. That thought stayed with me. Because before moving to America, I believed happiness would come from arriving. Bigger house. Better English. More money. More success. More certainty. But sitting inside that tiny apartment, wearing thick socks and drinking cheap tea beside the small lamp, I realized something uncomfortable. A big dream can sometimes make you blind to the beauty already sitting beside you. And maybe that's why so many people feel tired today. Every time you reach one goal, it quietly invents another. The apartment was small. The future was uncertain. My English was awkward. But somewhere inside all that mess, a new version of me was quietly beginning to grow. Not louder. Not richer. Just stronger in silence. And strangely enough, that tiny apartment became the first place where I truly started understanding both English and myself. Winter without friends. Have you ever noticed that sadness becomes louder in winter? Not dramatic movie sadness. Real sadness. The quiet kind. The kind that sneaks into your chest while you microwave leftover soup and stare out a frozen apartment window pretending you are totally fine. Meanwhile, your soul looks like an abandoned parking lot at midnight. That was my first winter in America. And honestly, nobody warned me how different winter feels when you have no friends, no family nearby, and barely enough confidence to order medicine at a pharmacy without rehearsing the sentence 15 times first. Snow looked magical for exactly 3 days. After that, it became frozen emotional wallpaper. Every morning, the sky turned gray around 4 in the afternoon. Trees looked empty. The sidewalks were covered with dirty snow piles that resembled giant melting marshmallows nobody wanted anymore. People walked quickly with coffee cups in their hands, shoulders tight against the cold wind, faces hidden inside scarves. Meanwhile, I stayed inside our tiny apartment most days because the cold outside felt easier than the fear inside me. Fear of speaking English. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of becoming invisible. And invisibility is strange. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. One silent grocery trip at a time. One awkward conversation at a time. One missed opportunity after another because your brain whispers, "What if you embarrass yourself?" So you stay quiet. Then quiet becomes a habit. Psychologists actually talk about this. Human beings need social connection almost like we need food and sleep. Studies from Harvard and other long-term mental health research show that loneliness increases stress hormones, weakens motivation, and even affects memory. Your brain literally performs worse when you feel isolated for long periods. Which explains why I could remember entire song lyrics from middle school but suddenly forgot basic English words while talking to real humans. My brain was buffering emotionally. One afternoon, I tried calling customer service about our internet problem. Simple task, right? Just explain the Wi-Fi wasn't working. Except the woman on the phone spoke so quickly I thought she might secretly be auctioning furniture instead of helping customers. Have you tried restarting the router, ma'am? I froze. Then came the most dangerous sentence in English history. Can you repeat that? She repeated it. Faster. At that point my soul left my body and sat quietly in another room. Eventually I thanked her for absolutely nothing and hung up while the internet continued dying peacefully in the corner. I laughed afterward, but not the happy kind of laugh. More like the exhausted laugh people make when life turns into a low-budget comedy. And during that winter, exhaustion followed me everywhere. I missed home in weird ways. Not big things. Tiny things. The sound of familiar language around me. The smell of food from street vendors. Family conversations happening in the background while somebody washed dishes. Even noise itself. America sometimes felt too quiet. Especially inside the apartment after sunset. My husband worked overtime often during those months because money was tight. Rent, insurance, groceries, heating bills, adulthood in America arrives like a subscription service you never remember signing up for. Every time another bill appeared, I suddenly understood why adults stare at supermarket prices like detectives solving crimes. One evening, I sat alone eating instant noodles while watching English listening videos on my phone. The teacher in the video smiled confidently and said, "Learning English can be fun." I wanted to respectfully throw the phone into another dimension. Because when people are emotionally tired, even simple learning feels heavy. This is something neuroscience explains beautifully. The brain learns better when it feels safe and emotionally balanced. But stress increases cortisol levels, and too much cortisol weakens concentration and memory formation. In simple words, anxiety turns your brain into a chaotic group chat. That's why forcing yourself aggressively often fails. Your brain isn't lazy. It's overwhelmed. And honestly, hearing that changed something for me. Instead of punishing myself for struggling, I started paying attention to smaller wins. One full English sentence at the grocery store. One successful phone call. One conversation with a cashier without panicking internally like a squirrel crossing traffic. Little victories. Tiny proof that progress existed even when confidence didn't. I also started walking outside more despite the cold. At first, I hated it. The wind slapped my face like unpaid rent. My hands froze. My shoes made crunchy sounds in the snow. But slowly those walks became important. Because movement changes emotion. Research shows walking helps regulate stress, improve mood, and increase cognitive flexibility. Basically, your brain behaves better when your body moves instead of emotionally fermenting indoors all day. So I walked. Past frozen cars. Past small coffee shops glowing warmly through windows. Past couples arguing quietly while carrying groceries. Past ordinary American life happening everywhere around me. And something surprising happened. The more I observed people, the less alone I felt. Everybody looked tired somehow. The businessman rushing through snow while answering phone calls. The exhausted mother carrying 2 grocery bags and a screaming toddler. The old man smoking outside his apartment building staring into space like he was replaying memories nobody else could see. Suddenly America stopped feeling like a perfect movie. It felt human. Messy. Imperfect. Lonely sometimes. Just like me. One night near Christmas, snow covered everything outside our building. The world looked soft and silent. My husband came home late carrying discounted hot chocolate packets because they were cheaper after the holiday season. That tiny detail nearly broke my heart. Not because it was sad. Because it was love. Real love often looks small. Not fireworks. Not luxury vacations. Sometimes love looks like somebody remembering you like hot chocolate even when money is stressful and both of you are exhausted. We sat together near the window drinking hot chocolate from mismatched mugs while snow fell outside. Then my husband asked me something simple. Are you happy here? The question stayed in the air for a second. I didn't know how to answer. Because happiness wasn't simple anymore. I missed home. I felt lonely. I struggled with English every day. But I was also changing. Growing. Learning how to survive uncertainty without becoming bitter. And maybe adulthood is partly realizing that happiness and sadness can exist inside the same room at the same time. You can feel grateful and exhausted. Hopeful and scared. Lost and still moving forward. That winter taught me something nobody explains properly when you move to another country, sometimes before life becomes beautiful. It becomes unbearably quiet. Quiet enough for you to hear your fears clearly. But also quiet enough to finally hear yourself. And somewhere between the snowstorms, awkward English conversations, cheap dinners, and lonely evenings inside that tiny apartment, I slowly stopped waiting for confidence to magically arrive. Instead, I started building it one imperfect day at a time. Like stacking tiny bricks in the cold. Not glamorous. Not fast. But real. And strangely enough, that difficult winter became the season where I first realized I might actually survive this new life after all. Coffee shop English. Nobody tells you this before moving to America, but sometimes the scariest place in the country is not the airport, the hospital, or the job interview. It's the coffee shop line behind three impatient strangers while you suddenly forget how English works. My personal nightmare began on a Tuesday morning. Outside, winter was finally starting to loosen its grip. Small patches of snow melted along the sidewalks. The sky looked less angry. People smiled a little more. Even the air smelled different, like cold concrete mixed with roasted coffee beans and car exhaust. Very poetic. Very American. That morning, I decided I was tired of hiding inside the apartment. Not magically brave. Just tired. There's a difference. So I walked to a small coffee shop about 10 minutes away from our building. I had passed it many times during my lonely winter walks. Warm yellow lights glowed through the windows every evening. People sat inside talking, typing on laptops, laughing loudly like they had stable emotional lives and understood tax forms. Honestly, I envied them. The coffee shop itself was tiny. Wooden tables. Indie music playing softly in the background. The smell of espresso floating through the air like emotional support. One wall had handwritten menu boards with drinks that sounded less like beverages and more like fantasy characters. Caramel macchiato. Vanilla cold brew. Oat milk lavender latte. Meanwhile, I still mentally celebrated every successful pronunciation of croissant. The line moved slowly. My heartbeat moved quickly. And here's something fascinating about social anxiety. Your brain dramatically overestimates how much people notice your mistakes. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. You feel like everyone is analyzing your every awkward pause, pronunciation error, or strange sentence structure. In reality, most people are too busy worrying about themselves. But try explaining that to your nervous system while ordering coffee in a second language. The woman in front of me ordered confidently without even looking at the menu. The man behind me checked his watch every 6 seconds like he personally controlled time itself. Then suddenly it was my turn. The cashier smiled. "What can I get started for you today?" And just like that, my brain disconnected from civilization. I stared at the menu pretending to think deeply when actually I was translating reality inside my head like an exhausted computer. Coffee. You came here for coffee. Simple mission. You trained for this. I finally ordered something small. Very small. Emotionally safe. No complicated customizations. No oat milk adventures. The cashier asked another question. Hot or iced? For one horrifying second, I forgot the word hot. How does a human forget hot? It's one syllable. Cavemen probably knew this word. But anxiety is weird. Stress temporarily affects working memory, especially during language processing. When your brain feels pressure, simple information suddenly hides from you like unpaid bills. Hot, I answered proudly, sounding like a medieval traveler discovering soup for the first time. The cashier smiled kindly. Great choice. And honestly, that tiny kindness mattered more than she probably realized. Because embarrassment shrinks when people respond with warmth instead of judgment. I sat near the window holding my coffee cup with both hands like it contained emotional healing powers. Around me, conversations floated through the cafe. Fast English. Messy English. Real English. Not textbook conversations about fictional airports and imaginary business meetings. Real people talking about rent, dating, dogs, work stress, movies, politics, weather, bad roommates. And somebody named Kevin who apparently ruined Thanksgiving. This was different. For the first time since arriving in America, English stopped sounding like an exam. It sounded human. That coffee shop slowly became part of my routine. Not because the coffee was extraordinary. Honestly, it tasted aggressively average. But because it became my unofficial classroom. Every visit turned into listening practice. At first, I barely spoke. Then little moments started happening. A cashier asked how my day was. Someone complimented my scarf. An old man near the window joked about the weather being cold enough to freeze your soul. I laughed too hard at that sentence because honestly, relatable. And something important changed during those interactions. I stopped trying to sound perfect. This sounds simple, but psychologically it's huge. Many English learners secretly believe they must speak perfectly before speaking confidently. But language researchers consistently show the opposite is true. Confidence grows through imperfect communication, not before it. Children learn language through mistakes constantly. Adults try to avoid mistakes completely. That's why adults often progress slower emotionally even when they understand grammar better intellectually. One afternoon, I accidentally became part of a conversation. A woman sitting nearby noticed the book I was reading and asked if I liked it. Normally I would panic politely and escape the situation like a socially confused raccoon. But that day, something strange happened. I answered. Slowly. Carefully. Awkwardly. But honestly. Yes. I like it because English is simple. She smiled immediately. That's the best way to learn. Then we talked. Not long. Maybe 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes felt bigger than entire months of silent studying. Because suddenly English wasn't just vocabulary anymore. It became connection. And human brains are designed to learn through emotional interaction. Studies show conversation activates deeper memory systems than passive studying alone. That's why people remember phrases from meaningful moments more easily than random memorization lists. Emotion teaches faster than repetition sometimes. Of course, not every interaction went smoothly. One day I confidently ordered iced tea and somehow received a sandwich. To this day, I still don't fully understand what happened linguistically. Another time, I misunderstood a joke completely and laughed 10 seconds too late like a malfunctioning robot discovering comedy. But little by little, fear loosened its grip. And I noticed something else too. Americans didn't actually expect perfection from me. Most people cared more about energy than grammar. If you smiled, tried sincerely, and stayed open, conversations usually survived. This realization changed everything. Because for months, I treated English like a performance. But language is not performance. It's participation. And participation is messy. One rainy afternoon, the coffee shop was almost empty. Soft jazz played through the speakers. Outside, water rolled down the windows while people hurried through the streets under umbrellas. I sat there writing new English phrases into my notebook. A barista cleaning nearby looked at my notes and asked, "Studying English?" I nodded nervously. Then she said something I still remember years later. "You're doing better than you think." That sentence stayed with me all evening. Because sometimes progress feels invisible while you're living inside it. You only notice how far you've come when you suddenly realize something that once terrified you now feels ordinary. Months earlier, entering that coffee shop felt impossible. Now the workers recognized me. They knew my order. One barista even misspelled my name consistently every week, which honestly felt like emotional progress. And maybe that's how confidence really grows. Not through giant movie moments. Not through sudden transformation. But through repeated ordinary experiences that slowly teach your nervous system. You are safe here. You can survive mistakes. You can belong before becoming perfect. That tiny coffee shop taught me more than English. It taught me how to exist in America without apologizing for learning slowly. And sitting there one quiet afternoon, listening to strangers laugh while warm coffee steamed beside me, I realized something unexpected. The life I once feared might actually become the life I love. Love inside hard days. Nobody prepares you for how small arguments become gigantic inside a tiny apartment. Especially when money is tight, emotions are tired. And both people secretly miss the version of themselves they used to be before adulthood turned into spreadsheets, grocery receipts, and emotional damage disguised as communication. Our apartment in America had very thin walls. Dangerously thin. Thin enough that we could hear neighbors arguing upstairs about laundry detergent at midnight. Thin enough that every sigh inside our own kitchen sounded dramatic. Thin enough that silence itself sometimes felt louder than conversation. And during those months, my husband and I were learning something difficult. Love becomes different when survival enters the room. Back when we first dreamed about building a life in the United States, everything sounded exciting. We imagined road trips, better opportunities, cozy apartment dinners, improving our English together, maybe even buying a small house someday. Very cinematic. Reality looked more like two exhausted people standing in Walmart comparing pasta prices while pretending not to calculate bank account balances. Mentally. Romance. American Edition. One evening, my husband came home late from work carrying stress on his face like invisible luggage. His shoulders looked heavy. His eyes looked tired. Outside. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while the heater made strange clicking sounds again like it personally disagreed with our financial situation. I had spent the entire day alone practicing English listening exercises and cleaning the apartment obsessively because anxiety sometimes disguises itself as productivity. When he walked inside, I asked a simple question. Did you pay the electricity bill? Wrong timing. Maybe wrong tone too. He sighed immediately. And somehow that sigh turned into tension. Then tension turned into sharp little comments. Then sharp comments became a full argument about things that weren't actually about electricity at all. Funny how couples do that. Nobody fights about dishes. They fight about exhaustion. Nobody fights about money. They fight about fear. Psychologists explain this beautifully. When humans feel chronic stress, financial pressure, loneliness, uncertainty, the nervous system becomes more emotionally reactive. Small frustrations suddenly feel personal because the brain is already overloaded. Basically, your emotional battery drops to 2% and suddenly somebody breathing incorrectly feels offensive. And honestly, that was us sometimes. Two people trying hard not to drown emotionally while pretending everything was fine. At one point during the argument, My husband said quietly, "You don't understand how stressful work is." That sentence hurt more than yelling. Because I wanted to scream back. You think staying alone all day feeling invisible is easy? But instead I stayed silent. Which, according to relationship experts, is also terrible communication. Very efficient disaster, honestly. That night we ate dinner quietly. Just the sound of forks touching plates. Outside, rain kept falling. Inside, distance quietly sat between us at the table. And here's the dangerous thing about difficult seasons in relationships. Your brain starts collecting negative evidence. One bad conversation suddenly connects itself to 10 older frustrations. Psychologists call this negativity bias. Humans naturally remember painful interactions more strongly than positive ones because survival instincts prioritize threats. So during stressful periods, couples accidentally become emotional detectives searching for proof that things are wrong. He sounded annoyed. She didn't smile. He forgot. She seems distant. Tiny moments become giant emotional court cases. Meanwhile, both people are secretly just tired and scared. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The apartment was cold. Gray winter light barely entered through the blinds. My husband still slept quietly beside me, looking younger and softer without stress on his face. And suddenly, I remembered something embarrassing. Back home, before marriage, I used to think love was mainly about compatibility. Now I realized love is also about endurance. About patience. About choosing kindness during moments when irritation would feel easier. That realization hit hard. Because somewhere inside the pressure of adapting to America, improving my English, surviving financially, and trying to succeed, I had quietly stopped noticing how difficult this transition was for him too. We were both carrying invisible weight. Just different kinds. Later that afternoon, I walked to the coffee shop again. Rainwater covered the sidewalks. Cars sprayed dirty water everywhere. My shoes got soaked almost immediately because apparently American weather enjoys psychological warfare. Inside the cafe, warm air wrapped around me instantly. People typed on laptops. A couple near the window shared headphones quietly. Someone laughed loudly near the counter. Normal life. Human life. I ordered coffee more confidently now. Small progress. Then while sitting there, I overheard two older women talking nearby. One of them said something simple. Marriage gets heavy when two people stop feeling seen. That sentence stayed in my head the entire walk home. Seen. Not fixed. Not perfect. Seen. And honestly, that changed something. Because many relationship problems are not caused by lack of love. They're caused by emotional disconnection. Humans need acknowledgement almost as deeply as affection. Research in psychology consistently shows people feel safer, calmer, and more emotionally connected when they feel understood by their partner. Not solved. Understood. That evening, when my husband returned home, I tried something different. No blame. No emotional courtroom. Just honesty. I think we're both overwhelmed, I said quietly. He looked tired again, but softer this time. Then something unexpected happened. He admitted he was scared too. Scared about money. Scared about the future. Scared he was failing us somehow. And suddenly the argument from the night before looked completely different. Not two enemies fighting. Just two exhausted humans protecting fears they didn't know how to explain properly. We talked for hours that night. About loneliness. About missing family. About cultural differences in America that still confused us. Even small things. Like how Americans casually say, "Let's hang out sometime," without actually scheduling anything. Emotionally confusing behavior, honestly. Or how work culture here often glorifies being busy until people practically schedule emotional breakdowns between meetings. We laughed more that night too. Real laughter. The healing kind. At one point my husband joked, "Our apartment is so small even our problems have nowhere to hide." And honestly? True. But something beautiful also happens in small spaces. People learn each other deeply. There's nowhere to escape emotionally forever. No giant house to disappear inside. No luxury distractions. Just two people repeatedly choosing whether love will become softer or harder under pressure. That night, we made instant noodles together after midnight because apparently emotional breakthroughs require carbohydrates. While cooking, I accidentally dropped noodles onto the floor and yelled dramatically, "America is testing me personally." My husband laughed so hard he nearly spilled the soup. And in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by cheap furniture, overdue stress, and steam rising from mismatched bowls, I suddenly understood something important. Happy couples are not couples without problems. They are couples who learn how to return to each other after difficult moments. That's different. Very different. Our apartment was still tiny. Bills still existed. English still exhausted me sometimes. But slowly, our marriage stopped feeling like two people surviving separately inside the same room. It started feeling like a team again. Messy. Imperfect. Occasionally dramatic over electricity bills. But real. And maybe real love isn't the giant romantic movie scene people expect. Maybe real love is simply finding someone willing to sit beside you in the middle of uncertainty and whisper, "We'll figure it out together." Even when both of you secretly have no idea what you're doing. The night I almost quit. There's a dangerous moment that happens before people give up. It's usually very quiet. Not dramatic. No emotional movie soundtrack. No giant speech. No rain pouring outside while somebody screams at the sky. Real quitting feels smaller than that. It looks like sitting on the edge of a bed at midnight staring at your phone thinking, "Maybe I'm just not good enough for this life." That moment found me on a Thursday night in early spring. And honestly, I almost believed it. The day started badly from the beginning. You know those mornings where your brain wakes up already tired? Your body moves, but your motivation stays asleep somewhere under emotional rubble. That was me. The apartment looked messy. Laundry waited in giant judgmental piles. The refrigerator contained approximately 3 edible things and 1 suspicious yogurt I no longer trusted spiritually. Meanwhile outside, cold rain covered everything again because apparently American weather enjoys character development arcs. But the real reason I felt nervous that morning was simple. I had a job interview. Nothing glamorous. Just a small part-time position at a local store. But to me, it felt enormous. Bigger than money. Bigger than work itself. Because deep down, I hoped the job would prove something. That I could survive here. That my English was improving. That I wasn't becoming invisible inside this new country. I prepared obsessively. I practiced interview questions for hours. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? Why do you want to work here? At one point I practiced smiling in the bathroom mirror and accidentally scared myself. Very healthy behavior. Psychologists actually explain this phenomenon well. When people attach too much emotional meaning to one event, the brain increases pressure dramatically. Suddenly a simple interview stops being an opportunity and becomes proof of personal worth, which is emotionally dangerous. Because human beings are terrible at separating rejection from identity. If one thing fails, we immediately build an entire documentary about how our whole life is collapsing. Anyway, I arrived 15 minutes early because anxiety and punctuality are secretly best friends. The store smelled like shampoo, cardboard boxes, and artificial air freshener. Bright fluorescent lights made everything look slightly depressing. Employees moved quickly between aisles while soft pop music played overhead. The manager greeted me politely. At first, everything felt okay. Not perfect, but survivable. I answered slowly, carefully. I even understood most questions without mentally translating every sentence word by word. Small miracle. Then came one difficult moment. The manager asked something longer, too fast, too detailed, and halfway through her sentence my brain completely disconnected from reality. I panicked. You know that horrible feeling when somebody is still talking but your mind already crashed 3 sentences ago? I smiled awkwardly. Then I asked her to repeat the question. She did. Slower this time. But panic had already entered the room. Suddenly every English word I knew scattered like birds escaping a parking lot explosion. My answer became a disaster. Grammar collapsed. Confidence disappeared. At one point I accidentally used the wrong verb tense so aggressively I may have invented a new timeline. The manager stayed kind, but I could feel the shift. That subtle moment when conversations become more polite than hopeful. An hour later, I walked home through cold rain carrying disappointment like wet clothing stuck to my skin. Nobody rejected me directly. But deep down, I already knew. And honestly, that walk home felt longer than any winter night before it. Cars splashed rainwater near the sidewalks. People hurried past me with umbrellas and coffee cups and busy American lives. Somewhere nearby, somebody laughed loudly inside a restaurant. Meanwhile, my brain started doing what anxious brains do best. Collecting evidence against me. Your English isn't enough. You'll never belong here. You should stop trying. And here's the dangerous thing about negative thoughts. Repetition creates familiarity. The more often your brain hears something emotionally painful, the more believable it starts sounding, even without proof. Neuroscientists call this cognitive reinforcement. I call it emotional bullying from your own mind. When I got home, the apartment felt unusually small. Gray light filled the room. The sink contained dishes. The heater hummed softly. Everything looked ordinary, which somehow made me feel worse. Because I expected life abroad to feel meaningful every day. Instead, some days felt painfully average. I sat on the floor near the couch and cried quietly for the first time in months. Not huge dramatic crying. Exhausted crying. The kind where you're too tired even to fully collapse emotionally. And for the first time since arriving in America, I seriously thought about quitting. Not just the job search. Everything. The constant English practice. The endless awkward conversations. The pressure to adapt. The loneliness. All of it. I imagined returning home where life felt easier, language felt natural, and supermarkets didn't require emotional courage. Honestly, the fantasy felt comforting for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. My husband came home early. He saw my face immediately and understood something was wrong before I even spoke. I told him everything. The interview. The panic. The embarrassment. The feeling that maybe I wasn't strong enough for this life. After I finished talking, he stayed quiet for a second. Then he said one simple sentence. Do you know how many times babies fall before they learn to walk? I looked at him, confused. He continued. They fall hundreds of times. But nobody watches a baby fall and says, maybe walking just isn't for you. That sentence hit harder than motivation speeches ever could. Because somewhere along the way, adults forget that learning always looks awkward in the middle. Always. Nobody becomes fluent before sounding strange. Nobody becomes confident before feeling uncomfortable. Progress is usually embarrassing first. And suddenly I realized something important. I wasn't failing because I struggled. I was struggling because I was learning. Huge difference. That night we ate frozen pizza because emotional crises apparently reduce cooking ambition dramatically. While eating, my husband told me stories about his own failures from years earlier. Mistakes at work. Rejections. Moments where he also felt lost and uncertain. And slowly, the shame inside me softened. Because shame grows strongest in isolation. But honesty weakens it. Later that evening, I opened my English notebook again. Not because I suddenly felt inspired. Honestly, I still felt terrible. But I wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Bad days are not final decisions. Then underneath it, I practiced new interview answers again. Slowly. Imperfectly. Patiently. And here's what nobody tells you about resilience. It's usually not dramatic courage. It's quiet repetition. It's trying again while still doubting yourself. It's making coffee the next morning even after crying the night before. It's continuing before confidence arrives. Outside, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows again. Inside, our tiny home still looked the same. Small kitchen. Cheap furniture. Bills waiting on the counter. But something inside me had changed slightly. Not magically healed. Not suddenly fearless. Just unwilling to quit yet. And sometimes, that tiny difference becomes the moment your life quietly begins turning in a new direction. Because the night I almost gave up was also the night I unknowingly became stronger. Learning English slowly. Here's something nobody likes to admit about learning English in adulthood. Your brain is not broken. It's just tired of being embarrassed. That realization came to me on a quiet Sunday morning while I sat in our tiny apartment wearing oversized pajamas. Reheating coffee for the third time because I kept forgetting to drink it while replaying the same English audio again and again. Normal behavior. Very sophisticated lifestyle. Outside, spring had finally arrived in America. Snow disappeared. Trees slowly turned green again. People opened apartment windows. Somewhere outside, a dog barked with the confidence of a creature that had never once worried about pronunciation mistakes. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the kitchen table whispering English sentences like a secret agent trying not to alert nearby civilians. I would like a medium coffee. Pause. Repeat. Again. Slowly. And honestly? Something strange was happening. For months, I thought learning English meant forcing my brain harder. Faster listening. More grammar. More pressure. More study hours. Basically treating my nervous system like an employee trapped inside a toxic workplace. But the harder I pushed, the more exhausted I became. Then one random evening at the coffee shop, I overheard a conversation between two college students talking about language learning. One of them said something simple. Your brain needs repetition without panic. That sentence stayed in my head for days. Because panic had quietly become part of my entire learning process. Every mistake felt dangerous. Every awkward conversation felt like proof I was failing. And neuroscience explains exactly why this destroys progress. When humans feel emotionally threatened, the brain prioritizes survival over learning. The amygdala activates stress responses while the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for reasoning, memory, and language processing, works less efficiently. In simple words, fear makes your brain stupid temporarily. Very rude biological design, honestly. So instead of attacking English aggressively every day, I tried something different. I slowed everything down. Way down. At first it felt ridiculous. I listened to slow English podcasts while washing dishes. I repeated simple sentences while folding laundry. I described everyday actions aloud inside the apartment. I am cutting vegetables. The weather is warm today. This soup smells good. Honestly, if someone secretly recorded me during those months, they would probably assume I escaped from a very educational cooking show. But slowly, something fascinating happened. English started feeling less heavy. Because language learning works better when the brain feels emotionally safe and connected to real experiences. Studies show that people remember vocabulary and sentence patterns more effectively when they attach them to sensory experiences, emotions, or personal stories. Basically, your brain loves meaning more than memorization. And suddenly I understood why textbook learning exhausted me before. I was trying to memorize English instead of living inside it. So I started building small daily rituals. Every morning, I listened to simple English conversations while making breakfast. Every afternoon, I read short stories aloud slowly. Every evening, I watched American videos with subtitles and repeated phrases that sounded useful in real life. Not complicated business English. Real human English. Things people actually say. I'm just tired. That sounds good. I'll think about it. Traffic is terrible today. Little phrases. Tiny building blocks. And here's the beautiful thing about repetition. Confidence grows quietly before you even notice it. One afternoon, while grocery shopping, a cashier asked me casually, "Did you find everything okay?" Normally my brain would panic and prepare for emotional evacuation. But this time, I answered naturally. Yes, thank you. No freezing. No mental collapse. No internal emergency meeting. The conversation lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt huge to me. Because progress in language learning is rarely dramatic. It's subtle. You suddenly understand a joke. You stop translating every sentence. You speak before fear fully arrives. And slowly your brain realizes, oh, we can actually do this. Psychologists call this self-efficacy, the belief that you are capable of succeeding through repeated small experiences. The brain builds confidence not from motivation speeches but from evidence. Tiny successful moments. Repeated consistently. That realization changed my entire relationship with learning. I stopped asking, how fast can I improve? And started asking, how can I make English part of my life without hating it? Huge difference. Because honestly, many adults secretly traumatize themselves while learning languages. Too much pressure. Too much comparison. Too much shame. Social media makes it worse sometimes. You see videos titled "Become Fluent in 30 Days." While your brain still celebrates correctly understanding restaurant menus. Very humbling experience. But real language learning isn't magic. It's emotional adaptation. And emotional adaptation takes time. One evening, I sat near the apartment window practicing pronunciation quietly while rain fell outside. The room smelled like garlic and soup from dinner. My husband watched television nearby while I repeated sentences softly under my breath. Then suddenly he looked at me and said, "Your English sounds different now." I laughed immediately. Different bad or different good? He smiled. Different confident. That word stayed with me. Confident. Not perfect. Not fluent. Confident. And maybe that matters more. Because confidence changes communication even before grammar improves fully. Studies in social psychology show that people respond more positively to speakers who appear relaxed and engaged, even with imperfect language skills. Energy matters. Connection matters. Human warmth matters. Perfection? Less than most people think. Around that time, I also noticed something surprising about Americans. Most people genuinely appreciated effort. If I struggled to explain something but kept trying sincerely, people usually became kinder, not colder. A barista spoke slower for me once. An older woman at the grocery store patiently helped me understand a coupon machine that looked technologically angry for no reason. Even strangers sometimes smiled encouragingly during conversations. And slowly, the fear inside me began shrinking. Not disappearing completely. Just losing power. Like a loud television finally being turned down. One afternoon at the coffee shop, I overheard a little boy speaking imperfectly while reading aloud to his mother. He stumbled over words constantly. But he kept going. No embarrassment. No shame. Just learning. And suddenly I realized adults make language learning emotionally harder because we expect ourselves to perform immediately instead of grow gradually. Children allow themselves to sound unfinished. Adults apologize for it. That realization hit deeply. Because maybe growth always requires temporary awkwardness. Maybe every new version of yourself begins as somebody slightly uncomfortable. That night, back inside our tiny apartment, I opened my notebook again. But this time, instead of writing vocabulary lists, I wrote something else. Slow progress is still progress. Then underneath it, I added. Confidence grows quietly. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, neighbors laughed loudly. The heater stayed silent for once. The apartment felt calm. And for the first time since arriving in America, learning English no longer felt like a battle against myself. It felt like building a new life slowly. Word by word. Story by story. Day by day. And strangely enough, the slower I learned, the stronger I became. Our first family dinner. There's a specific kind of fear nobody talks about when learning English in America. Not job interviews. Not phone calls. Dinner conversations. Because interviews have structure. Phone calls eventually end. But dinner conversations? Those things move unpredictably like emotional dodgeball. People interrupt each other. Someone tells a fast story. Everybody laughs before you understand the joke. Then your brain arrives emotionally 6 seconds late holding half a sentence and a confused smile. That fear followed me the day our neighbors invited us over for dinner. And honestly, I almost said no immediately. The invitation came unexpectedly on a warm Saturday afternoon in late spring. The apartment building smelled like grilled food because several families downstairs had started using tiny outdoor barbecue grills the moment winter disappeared. Children rode bicycles in the parking lot. Music floated softly through open windows. America suddenly looked softer during spring. More human. Less lonely. I was carrying laundry downstairs when our neighbor Emily stopped me near the mailbox area. She lived across from us with her husband and 2 young children. We had exchanged polite greetings before, but never real conversations. She smiled warmly and said, "We're having a small dinner tonight with some friends. You and your husband should come." Immediately my brain began emergency procedures. Dinner? With Americans? Multiple Americans? At the same table? Absolutely terrifying. But before anxiety could fully kidnap my personality, I heard myself say, "Okay, thank you." Then I walked back upstairs carrying laundry and emotional instability simultaneously. The entire afternoon, I panicked quietly. What if I misunderstood questions? What if they spoke too quickly? What if conversation topics became complicated? What if I accidentally nodded enthusiastically to something horrifying because I only understood half the sentence? Very real fear. My husband noticed immediately. "You look nervous," he said while buttoning his shirt later that evening. "I would rather fight a bear than attend this dinner," I answered honestly. And psychologically speaking, that reaction makes sense. Research shows social situations in a second language create cognitive overload. Your brain works harder decoding sounds, translating meaning, predicting responses, managing pronunciation, and monitoring social behavior simultaneously. Basically, your nervous system runs 12 applications at once while emotionally overheating. Still, we went. Because somewhere inside all my fear, another part of me quietly understood something important. Isolation was becoming too comfortable. And comfort zones are sneaky. At first they protect you. Then eventually they trap you. Emily's apartment looked slightly larger than ours, though honestly maybe every apartment looks bigger when you're not paying rent for it. Warm yellow lights glowed softly across the room. The smell of roasted chicken, garlic, and baked bread filled the air. Music played quietly in the background while people talked and laughed naturally around the kitchen. Everything felt warm. Loud. Fast. Human. My anxiety immediately clocked into work. There were 6 other people there. Couples mostly. Somebody opened sparkling water bottles in the kitchen. Someone else joked about traffic. A little boy ran through the hallway holding dinosaur toys while his sister screamed dramatically about crayons. Meanwhile, I stood there smiling politely like an emotionally confused exchange student accidentally entering a live television sitcom. But something surprising happened almost immediately. Nobody cared that my English wasn't perfect. Actually, most people seemed more interested in whether I felt comfortable than whether my grammar deserved awards. One man asked where we were from. Another asked how long we had lived in America. Emily showed us old family photos while laughing about how chaotic parenting felt. The conversations moved quickly sometimes, yes. I missed jokes occasionally. I misunderstood a story about camping and somehow thought they were discussing prison for nearly 2 full minutes. But people repeated things kindly when needed. Nobody mocked me. Nobody acted impatient. And slowly, the tension inside my body began loosening. At one point during dinner, Emily asked me a simple question. What do you miss most from home? The room became quieter. And honestly, that question hit harder than expected. Because sometimes people ask ordinary questions and accidentally touch emotional earthquakes. I thought carefully before answering. The noise, I said finally. Everyone looked curious. I explained slowly. The sound of family. Neighbors. Familiar language everywhere. Back home, silence feels different. And suddenly something beautiful happened. People understood. Not perfectly. Not completely. But emotionally. One woman nodded immediately and admitted she felt lonely too after moving from another state years earlier. Another person talked about missing grandparents after college. Emily confessed motherhood sometimes felt isolating despite being surrounded by people constantly. And there it was again. That realization America kept teaching me over and over. Everybody carries invisible loneliness somehow. Even people who look confident. Even native English speakers. Even families laughing around dinner tables. Psychologists actually describe this well. Humans often overestimate how socially connected others feel while privately believing their own loneliness is unique. It's called pluralistic ignorance. Everyone quietly struggles while assuming everyone else is doing fine. Which means many people feel alone together. Kind of tragic. Kind of comforting too. As dinner continued, I noticed something else. Conversation wasn't about perfect language. It was about attention. Curiosity. Energy. People responded more to sincerity than grammar. If I spoke slowly but genuinely, conversations flowed. If I relaxed, my English improved naturally. Fear had been interrupting me more than vocabulary ever was. One funny moment still makes me laugh. Someone asked if I liked American food, and I confidently answered. Yes, but your cheese is very aggressive. The entire table burst into laughter. I panicked immediately, thinking I accidentally insulted an entire country's dairy industry. But Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. No, she said, you're actually right. And suddenly I was laughing too. Real laughter. Not polite survival laughter. Connection laughter. That tiny moment changed something important inside me. Because for months, I treated conversations like tests I could fail. But sitting there at that crowded dinner table, surrounded by warm food, loud children, and imperfect conversations, I finally understood something simple. Communication is not about sounding impressive. It's about making people feel something real. And real things are rarely perfect. Later that evening, after dessert, we all sat together talking while sunset light faded outside the windows. Somebody discussed work stress. Someone else talked about rising rent prices. Emily's husband joked that adulthood mostly meant becoming emotionally attached to discount coupons. Honestly, accurate. But what stayed with me most was not the conversation itself. It was the feeling afterward. For the first time since moving to America, I didn't feel like an outsider watching life happen from behind invisible glass. I felt included. Not fully transformed. Not magically confident forever. But present. And psychologically, belonging changes people deeply. Research consistently shows social connection improves emotional resilience, reduces anxiety, and even accelerates language learning because the brain becomes more relaxed and engaged during communication. Humans learn better when they feel accepted. That night proved it. When we finally walked back to our apartment, warm spring air moved softly through the parking lot. Somewhere nearby, music still played faintly from another building. My husband smiled at me. "You did really well tonight." I looked up at our tiny apartment window glowing softly in the dark. Then I realized something strange. The apartment still looked small from outside. But somehow my world suddenly felt bigger. Because maybe confidence doesn't arrive the moment you stop being afraid. Maybe it arrives the moment fear stops deciding your life for you. And somewhere between the awkward jokes, noisy dinner conversations, and aggressive cheese comment, I quietly started becoming someone new. Someone who no longer needed perfect English to feel worthy of being heard. Baby cries, new dreams. Nobody warns you that becoming a parent feels a little like being thrown into the ocean holding a tiny screaming potato that somehow controls your entire emotional stability. And if you're doing it in a foreign country, in a small apartment, while still learning English, congratulations. Your nervous system is now participating in an extreme sport. The day we found out I was pregnant, our apartment suddenly felt even smaller. Not physically smaller. Emotionally smaller. The kitchen looked tiny. The bedroom looked crowded. Even the hallway suddenly seemed too narrow for the gigantic future rushing toward us. Meanwhile, my brain immediately began producing dramatic thoughts at Olympic speed. How will we afford this? What if I don't understand hospital English? What if I become a terrible mother? Very calm. Very mature thinking. My husband looked shocked too, but in the hopeful kind of way. Like somebody standing at the edge of a huge unknown adventure trying not to panic publicly. That night we sat quietly at the kitchen table eating takeout noodles because apparently major life-changing news still requires carbohydrates. Outside, summer rain rolled softly against the apartment windows. Inside, neither of us knew exactly what to say. Then my husband smiled nervously and whispered, "We're really becoming a family." That sentence changed the room. Because suddenly this tiny apartment no longer felt like a temporary survival space. It felt like the beginning of something. Messy. Terrifying. Beautiful. And honestly, pregnancy in America felt surreal sometimes. The hospital visits. The paperwork. The medical vocabulary. The way nurses spoke quickly while my brain desperately translated terms like ultrasound, insurance coverage, and prenatal appointment as if decoding ancient prophecy. But something surprising happened during those months. My English improved faster than ever before. Not because I suddenly became smarter. Because love creates urgency. Psychologists explain this beautifully. Human motivation becomes stronger when learning connects to emotional meaning and responsibility. The brain pays more attention when something feels deeply personal or necessary for survival. And suddenly English wasn't just for me anymore. It became part of protecting my future child. I listened more carefully during appointments. I practiced medical vocabulary at home. I learned how to ask questions confidently instead of smiling politely while understanding absolutely nothing internally. Honestly, pregnancy turned me into a very determined student. A tired student. An emotional student. A student eating crackers at midnight while Googling baby symptoms dramatically. But still determined. Meanwhile, our apartment slowly transformed. Tiny baby clothes appeared everywhere. Second-hand furniture arrived piece by piece. Friends from the apartment building donated small things, blankets, toys, baby bottles. Advice nobody requested but everybody offered enthusiastically. Apparently, once you become pregnant, strangers immediately unlock expert-level storytelling about childbirth. Very intense community experience. One evening, Emily from across the hall visited with a bag full of baby clothes her children had outgrown. They grow too fast anyway, she laughed. I thanked her while folding tiny shirts so small they looked emotionally unrealistic. And suddenly I noticed something important. Months earlier, America felt cold and distant. Now people felt closer. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to matter. Community forms slowly like that sometimes. Not through giant life-changing moments. Through repeated small kindnesses. A borrowed chair. A shared meal. A neighbor asking how you're feeling. Tiny acts that quietly tell your nervous system. You are not alone here. Still, pregnancy was not magical every day. Social media lies about this constantly. Some days I felt happy. Other days I cried because we accidentally bought the wrong bread. Hormones are terrifying little chemical comedians. And our apartment? Absolute chaos. The bedroom contained baby clothes, books, blankets, paperwork, vitamins, and approximately 17 different fears floating invisibly through the air. Sleep became difficult too. At night I lay awake listening to traffic outside while my mind replayed endless worries. Would we have enough money? Would our child feel caught between cultures? Would my English ever feel truly natural? And perhaps the biggest fear quietly hiding underneath everything else. Would I lose myself completely? Because becoming a parent changes identity deeply. Research in psychology shows major life transitions, especially parenthood, temporarily increase emotional vulnerability because the brain restructures routines, priorities, and self-perception simultaneously. Basically, your entire internal world gets rearranged while you still need to buy groceries normally. Very unfair design. Then finally, one humid summer night, everything changed. The contractions started suddenly. Not cinematic. Not elegant. Just painful and confusing and emotionally aggressive. The hospital lights looked too bright. Nurses moved quickly around us. Machines beeped constantly. My husband looked terrified while trying heroically to appear calm. Meanwhile, I was entering another dimension entirely. And strangely enough, inside all that fear and exhaustion, my English still showed up. Not perfect English, but brave English. I asked questions. I understood instructions. I communicated. Months earlier, even ordering coffee terrified me. Now I was speaking English during one of the biggest moments of my life. That realization hit me later. Not in the hospital. Not immediately after birth. But days later while holding our baby quietly inside the apartment at 3 in the morning. Outside, the city stayed silent. Soft yellow streetlights glowed through the blinds. The apartment smelled like baby lotion, warm milk, and complete exhaustion. And there I was. Sitting in the same tiny apartment where I once cried from loneliness. Now holding an entirely new life in my arms. The baby cried often those first weeks. Actually, often feels too gentle a word. That tiny human screamed with the emotional intensity of somebody paying rent personally. Sleep disappeared. Our schedules collapsed. The apartment became permanently noisy. But strangely, the noise comforted me. Because months earlier silence felt unbearable. Now life overflowed from every corner. Tiny socks covered the floor. Baby bottles crowded the sink. Soft lullabies played from my phone while I whispered English words gently to our child. Good morning. You're okay. I'm here. Simple sentences. But they carried so much more now. And maybe that's what surprised me most about becoming a parent in America. My dreams changed. Before, I wanted fluency, confidence, success. Now, I wanted peace, stability, a loving home. Not perfect, just warm. One night, while rocking the baby to sleep, my husband looked around the messy apartment and laughed softly. You know, he said, this place somehow feels fuller now. And he was right. The apartment was still small. Money was still tight. Life was still uncertain. But somehow love had stretched the walls emotionally. Because happiness doesn't always arrive looking glamorous. Sometimes happiness arrives exhausted, carrying diapers, speaking imperfect English, and reheating cold coffee for the 4th time. But it arrives anyway. And holding my child quietly in the middle of that chaotic little apartment, I realized something powerful. The dream that once felt far away was no longer waiting in the future. It was already here. Crying loudly at 3 in the morning. A different American dream. At some point, without realizing it, I stopped chasing the version of happiness I thought America was supposed to give me. Not because I failed. Because I finally looked closely at the people who already had everything I once wanted. And honestly, many of them still looked exhausted. That realization began on an ordinary autumn afternoon while I pushed a stroller through a quiet neighborhood near our apartment. Yellow leaves covered the sidewalks. Cold wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere nearby, somebody was mowing grass with the emotional intensity of a man fighting ancient demons. Very American atmosphere. Our baby had finally fallen asleep after an hour of dramatic crying that honestly deserved professional acting awards. I walked slowly, enjoying the rare silence. Parents understand this deeply. When a baby sleeps, you suddenly protect peace like a security guard protecting national treasure. As I passed large houses with perfect lawns and expensive cars parked outside, something strange happened. For the first time since moving to America, I didn't feel jealous anymore. Months earlier, those neighborhoods made me feel small. I used to imagine the people inside those houses lived perfect lives. Perfect English. Perfect marriages. Perfect financial stability. Probably eating organic blueberries while discussing retirement plans calmly like emotionally evolved adults. Meanwhile, I was reheating leftover soup in a tiny apartment while trying not to step on baby toys at 2 in the morning. But now I noticed different things. One man yelled angrily into his phone while sitting inside a luxury SUV. A woman walked quickly into her house looking exhausted, still wearing work clothes while carrying grocery bags alone. Another couple argued quietly near their garage before suddenly stopping when neighbors walked by. And once again, America showed me something unexpected. Success and peace are not always the same thing. Psychologists actually study this. Humans constantly adapt to improved circumstances, a phenomenon called the hedonic treadmill. You finally reach the thing you thought would make you happy: more money, bigger house, better status. But after a short time, your brain normalizes it and starts chasing something else. Which explains why so many people look emotionally tired while living lives others envy. That thought followed me home. Inside our apartment, toys covered the floor like tiny colorful landmines. Laundry waited on the couch. The kitchen smelled like rice, coffee, and baby lotion. And somehow, I felt safe there. Not rich. Not glamorous. Safe. That feeling surprised me. Because before moving to the United States, I believed happiness would arrive dramatically. Like a movie ending. You struggle. You succeed. Suddenly everything feels complete forever while inspirational music plays in the background. But real life doesn't work like that. Happiness usually arrives quietly. In small moments. Like drinking warm coffee while your baby sleeps beside you. Or laughing with your husband while folding tiny clothes together at midnight because parenthood destroyed your schedule completely. Or understanding an English conversation naturally without mentally translating every word. Tiny moments. Soft moments. Real moments. One evening, after dinner, my husband and I sat near the apartment window while our child slept in the next room. Outside, autumn rain tapped gently against the glass. Traffic lights reflected red and yellow colors onto the wet streets below. The apartment still looked small. But it no longer felt temporary. And suddenly my husband asked, "If we had more money right now, do you think we'd actually be happier?" The question stayed in the room quietly. Honestly, I didn't know immediately. Because of course money matters. Financial stress is real. Research consistently shows financial insecurity increases anxiety, relationship tension, and emotional exhaustion. Pretending money doesn't matter usually comes from people with enough money already. But at the same time, I had also started noticing how modern life quietly trains people to postpone happiness constantly. I'll relax after I succeed. I'll enjoy life after I buy a house. I'll feel confident after I become perfect. The finish line keeps moving. And many people spend their entire lives emotionally sprinting toward peace instead of experiencing it occasionally along the way. That realization hit me deeply after becoming a parent. Because babies don't care about luxury. They care about presence. Warm arms. Gentle voices. Safety. Love. And honestly, adults are not that different. One afternoon, I took the baby to a small local park. Children played near the swings while parents sat nearby drinking coffee and discussing ordinary life things, school schedules, rising grocery prices, bad sleep, funny family stories. Nothing impressive. Nothing cinematic. But everybody looked real. Tired sometimes. Messy sometimes. Still laughing anyway. And sitting there listening to conversations in English that no longer felt impossible to understand. I suddenly realized how much my definition of success had changed. Before, I wanted to impress people. Now I wanted peace inside my own mind. Before, I measured life through achievement. Now I measured it through emotional warmth. Before, I believed happiness lived somewhere in the future. Now I noticed it hiding inside ordinary days constantly. Psychologists call this attentional awareness. The brain often ignores small positive experiences while obsessing over larger goals or fears. But people who intentionally notice ordinary meaningful moments usually report higher emotional well-being and lower chronic stress. In simple words, human happiness often depends less on having more and more on noticing what already exists. And honestly, that felt revolutionary to me. Because America constantly encourages bigger dreams. Bigger homes. Bigger careers. Bigger lifestyles. Everything faster. Louder. More impressive. But inside our tiny apartment, life taught me a completely different lesson. Sometimes enough is actually beautiful. One night, after finally getting the baby to sleep, I cleaned the apartment quietly while soft jazz music played from my phone. The kitchen light glowed warmly. Rain tapped softly outside again. My husband slept on the couch accidentally while trying to watch television. The scene looked unbelievably ordinary. Yet suddenly I felt emotional. Because months earlier, I thought my life abroad was falling apart. Now I realized something unexpected. This tiny life we built together was slowly becoming the exact thing my heart needed. Not perfect. Still stressful sometimes. Still uncertain. But meaningful. And maybe meaning matters more than perfection. I also noticed my English had changed naturally during this season. Not just vocabulary. Energy. I spoke more calmly now. More freely. Because confidence grows easier when you stop treating every conversation like a performance. And honestly, happiness works similarly. The harder you chase an idealized life, the easier you miss the beautiful imperfect one already happening around you. Later that night, before going to sleep, I stood quietly near the apartment window looking out at the glowing city lights. Somewhere far away, sirens echoed faintly through the streets. Cars moved endlessly below. Millions of people rushed through lives full of goals, stress, dreams, disappointments, ambition. Meanwhile, inside our small apartment, my family slept peacefully. And for the first time since arriving in America, I stopped asking myself whether this country would eventually make me happy. Because I finally understood something deeper. Happiness was never hiding inside a bigger apartment, perfect English, or some future version of success. It was quietly growing inside the life we were already living. One ordinary day at a time. When confidence finally came. The weirdest thing about confidence is this. It usually arrives long after you stop looking for it. Not during some dramatic breakthrough moment. Not after a perfect success story. Real confidence sneaks into your life quietly while you're busy surviving ordinary days. And honestly, I didn't even notice mine arriving at first. It happened on a random Tuesday afternoon inside a crowded grocery store while my baby tried passionately to eat a receipt. Very glamorous American dream moment. The store was busy that day. Shopping carts squeaked across the floor. Children cried somewhere near the cereal aisle. Holiday decorations already covered half the building, even though it was somehow still October because American stores believe time is a social construct. Meanwhile, I stood near the produce section holding bananas and mentally calculating whether avocados were emotionally worth the price. Then suddenly an older woman beside me smiled and asked, "Do you know if these apples are sweet?" And without thinking, I answered immediately, "Oh yes, we bought them last week. They're really good." That was it. Simple. Normal. Completely ordinary. But 5 seconds later, while pushing the shopping cart forward slowly, my brain suddenly froze. "Wait." I answered naturally. No panic. No translating. No internal emotional earthquake. Just conversation. And honestly, that tiny moment hit me harder than any English test score ever could. Because for months, maybe years emotionally, English had felt like climbing a mountain carrying invisible fear on my back. Every sentence required effort. Every conversation felt risky. Every mistake echoed loudly inside my head. But now, something had changed. Psychologists describe this beautifully. Repeated exposure gradually reduces fear responses in the brain. What once triggered anxiety slowly becomes familiar through consistent experience. It's called habituation. In simple words, your nervous system eventually gets bored of panicking. Very efficient survival system, honestly. As I continued shopping that day, I noticed other small things too. I understood announcements over the store speakers without concentrating hard. I chatted casually with the cashier. I even made a joke about inflation that somehow landed successfully. Me. A person who once nearly lost consciousness ordering coffee. Life is strange. Later that evening, while cooking dinner in our apartment, I kept replaying that grocery store moment in my head. Not because the conversation mattered. Because it didn't. That was the point. English had finally become ordinary. And maybe that's the real goal most people secretly want. Not perfection. Comfort. The ability to exist naturally without feeling mentally exhausted every time someone asks a simple question. Outside, cold autumn wind shook the trees near our apartment building. Our child sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by toys, making mysterious noises that sounded emotionally committed but linguistically unclear. Meanwhile, the apartment smelled like garlic, soup, and toasted bread. Home. Actual home. That realization still surprised me sometimes. Because when I first arrived in America, I spent so much energy trying to become someone better that I barely noticed myself becoming someone stronger. There's a difference. Better often means performing. Stronger usually means adapting. And adaptation changes people quietly. One afternoon a few weeks later, I experienced another strange moment. Emily invited several neighbors over again for a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just snacks, coffee, children running around causing minor destruction like tiny caffeinated raccoons. Months earlier, those social situations terrified me. Now, I still felt nervous sometimes. But not trapped. And during one conversation, something unexpected happened. I started telling a story. In English. A long story. Naturally. People listened, laughed, asked questions, interrupted casually the way humans do during comfortable conversations. Meanwhile, halfway through speaking, I suddenly realized I'm not translating anymore. The words were simply arriving. Imperfectly sometimes, yes. But freely. And psychologically, that moment matters deeply in language acquisition. Researchers explain that fluency increases when processing becomes automatic rather than consciously controlled. Your brain stops treating language like a puzzle and starts using it as communication instinctively. Basically, English finally moves downstairs from the panic department into the normal human department. Huge emotional upgrade. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat quietly near the apartment window thinking about how impossible this once felt. I remembered crying after failed conversations. Feeling invisible. Avoiding phone calls like they were government interrogations. I remembered the loneliness. The fear. The exhaustion. And honestly, I felt proud. Not arrogant. Not magically transformed. Just quietly proud. Because confidence built slowly through hundreds of invisible moments nobody else saw. The repeated listening practice while washing dishes. The awkward conversations at coffee shops. The mistakes. The embarrassment. The persistence. And maybe that's why real confidence feels different from temporary motivation. Motivation is emotional. Confidence is evidence. Your brain slowly collects proof that you can survive difficult things. That realization changed how I viewed almost everything in life. Not just English. Parenthood. Marriage. Living abroad. Even happiness itself. Because human beings constantly underestimate the power of gradual progress. Modern culture loves dramatic transformations. Viral success stories. Overnight changes. Before and after photos. But real life usually changes quietly. One repeated habit at a time. One uncomfortable conversation at a time. One ordinary day at a time. And honestly, ordinary days had built my entire new life. One evening, while walking home from the grocery store, I noticed Christmas lights appearing across apartment balconies already. Cold air carried the smell of food from nearby restaurants. Cars moved slowly through wet streets while music played softly from somewhere far away. America no longer felt like a foreign movie. It felt familiar now. Not because I suddenly understood everything about this country. Honestly, some American customs still confused me deeply. Especially tipping culture. Emotionally stressful mathematics. But familiarity had grown anyway. And so had I. Back inside the apartment, my husband looked up from the couch while I unpacked groceries. "You seem happy today," he said. I smiled without thinking. "I think I'm finally relaxing." That sentence surprised even me. Because maybe confidence isn't becoming fearless. Maybe confidence is finally allowing yourself to breathe normally again. To stop treating every mistake like disaster. To stop apologizing for learning slowly. To trust yourself enough to participate in life instead of observing it nervously from the edges. That night, after our child finally fell asleep, I opened my old English notebook again. The pages looked worn now. Full of vocabulary, awkward practice sentences, grocery lists, random thoughts, tiny emotional victories written during difficult seasons. Then I found one sentence from long ago. Bad days are not final decisions. I stared at it for a while quietly. Because the version of me who wrote that sentence months earlier had no idea what was coming. No idea she would eventually laugh naturally in English. Raise a child in America. Build friendships. Feel at home. And maybe that's the beautiful thing about difficult seasons. While you're surviving them, you rarely notice yourself becoming someone new. But one ordinary day, in the middle of a grocery store conversation about apples, you suddenly realize the person who once felt lost is already gone. The apartment feels bigger. It's strange how a place can stay exactly the same size, while your life inside it expands completely. Our apartment never became larger. The kitchen was still tiny. The bedroom was still crowded. The bathroom light still flickered occasionally like it was fighting personal emotional battles. And yet one winter evening, while standing in the middle of our living room surrounded by toys, laundry baskets, half-read children's books, and the smell of soup simmering on the stove, I suddenly realized something unbelievable. This place no longer felt small to me. It felt full. Full of memories. Full of noise. Full of life. And honestly, that realization almost made me emotional while holding a spatula. Very dramatic cooking experience. Outside, snow covered the streets again. Another American winter had arrived. But this winter felt completely different from the first one. The silence was gone. Now our child laughed loudly while running across the apartment in tiny socks that somehow made sliding across the floor look like a professional sport. My husband worked less overtime because things had slowly become more stable financially. Friends visited sometimes. Neighbors knocked on the door occasionally just to say hello. Even the apartment itself sounded different now. Not lonely. Lived in. Psychologists actually explain this beautifully. Human beings form emotional attachment to places through repeated meaningful experiences. A location stops being space and starts becoming home when memory, safety, and emotional connection accumulate there over time. In simple words, love changes architecture emotionally. And somehow our little apartment, the same place where I once cried quietly from loneliness and fear, had transformed into the center of our entire life. One Saturday morning, I woke up early before everyone else. Soft winter light entered through the blinds. The apartment was peaceful except for the gentle humming of the heater and distant traffic outside. I walked slowly through the living room holding a cup of coffee and suddenly started noticing tiny details everywhere. A small scratch on the kitchen table from late-night dinners. Our child's drawings taped crookedly near the refrigerator. The old lamp beside the window, the same lamp my husband bought during our first difficult winter together. That lamp almost broke me emotionally right there. Because suddenly I remembered everything. The fear. The loneliness. The exhausting English practice. The nights we worried about bills quietly after midnight. Back then, I thought the apartment represented struggle. Now I realized it also represented survival. Growth. Family. And maybe that's the strange thing about difficult seasons in life. You rarely understand their meaning while living through them. Only afterward. One afternoon during that winter, Emily invited us to a small holiday gathering downstairs. Families from the apartment building crowded into the shared community room carrying homemade food, desserts, paper plates, and chaotic energy. Children screamed joyfully everywhere. Somebody burned cookies slightly but insisted they were rustic. An older man played Christmas music too loudly from a portable speaker like he personally worked for holiday marketing campaigns. Honestly, the entire event felt beautifully messy. Months earlier, I would have stood quietly in the corner feeling nervous about every English conversation. Now, I moved naturally between groups. Talking. Laughing. Listening. Even helping another new immigrant woman feel comfortable because her English reminded me painfully of my earlier self, careful, hesitant, apologetic. At one point she whispered nervously, "I'm scared people won't understand me." And without thinking, I smiled and answered, "They understand more than you think." The moment I said it, something inside me shifted. Because suddenly I realized I had become the kind of person I once desperately needed. Not perfect. Not extraordinary. Just someone capable of making another human feel less alone. And honestly, that felt more meaningful than fluency ever could. Research in psychology consistently shows people experience deeper life satisfaction when they feel useful, connected, and emotionally supportive toward others. Happiness grows stronger when shared. Maybe that's why loneliness shrinks when kindness expands. Later that evening, after the party ended, we walked back upstairs carrying leftover food containers while snow fell softly outside. Our child fell asleep almost immediately after arriving home, exhausted from too much excitement and approximately 14 holiday cookies. The apartment looked cluttered again. Tiny shoes near the door. Blankets on the couch. Dishes waiting in the sink like emotionally patient little soldiers. But instead of stressing me out, the mess felt comforting somehow. Proof of life happening. One thing I noticed during those years in America was how much modern culture teaches people to hide imperfection constantly. Perfect homes online. Perfect bodies. Perfect relationships. Perfect success stories. Meanwhile, real human life usually looks like unfolded laundry and reheated coffee. And honestly, that realization became freeing. Because the more our apartment filled with ordinary family chaos, the less pressure I felt to perform some fantasy version of success. One snowy evening, while cleaning the kitchen together, my husband suddenly laughed and said, "Remember when we thought we couldn't survive here?" I laughed too. Because it sounded unbelievable now. Not because life became easy. It didn't. We still had stressful days. Unexpected bills. Arguments sometimes. Exhaustion. Parenting chaos. But we had changed. And that changes everything. Psychologists call this resilience adaptation. Humans often underestimate their ability to emotionally adjust after difficult experiences. The brain gradually develops new coping patterns, stronger emotional regulation, and greater confidence through repeated challenges. Basically, people become stronger quietly while complaining about being tired. Very human process. I noticed it in my English too. Not only in conversations. In identity. English no longer felt like a costume I wore awkwardly. It felt like part of my life now. Part of our family story. Sometimes I even caught myself thinking in English while grocery shopping or talking to neighbors. The version of me from that first lonely winter would never believe it. One night, after everyone fell asleep, I sat quietly beside the apartment window again. The same window where I once stood wondering if we had made a mistake moving here. Outside, snow-covered parked cars and glowing streetlights. The city looked calm and distant. Inside, Warm yellow light filled the apartment softly. And suddenly I understood something powerful. The apartment never became bigger. We did. Our love became bigger. Our courage became bigger. Our understanding of happiness became bigger. Even our pain had expanded into wisdom somehow. And maybe that's what growth actually looks like. Not escaping difficult places. Transforming inside them. Because years earlier, I thought success meant eventually leaving this tiny apartment behind for something larger and more impressive. Now I realized something completely different. This apartment witnessed our hardest moments. Our first real struggles in America. Our fears. Our learning. Our child's first steps. Our quiet victories nobody else saw. How could a place like that ever feel small? Sometimes the most ordinary spaces become sacred simply because of who you become inside them. And standing there in the quiet winter light, listening to my family breathing softly from the next room, I finally understood. Home is not measured in square feet. It's measured in love that stayed. The life we almost missed. If you had visited our apartment during the first winter we lived in America, you probably would have felt sorry for us. Honestly, I would have understood. The apartment was tiny. The walls were thin. Money was tight. Our English sounded uncertain. Some nights we ate simple noodles while pretending not to worry about bills. Some mornings I sat alone by the window wondering if we had made the biggest mistake of our lives. Back then, happiness felt far away. Like something waiting for richer people. More confident people. People with bigger homes and easier stories. But years later, standing inside that exact same apartment one quiet evening, I suddenly realized something almost unbelievable. We had already built the life we once prayed for. And the strangest part? We nearly missed it because we were too busy chasing a different version of happiness. Outside, snow fell softly across the city again. Warm lights glowed from nearby apartment windows while distant traffic moved slowly through the streets below. Inside, our child slept peacefully in the next room surrounded by stuffed animals and tiny blankets that somehow multiplied every year like emotional magic. The apartment smelled like soup, laundry detergent, and cinnamon candles. Ordinary life. Beautiful life. And honestly, I think modern people underestimate how healing ordinary life can become after surviving difficult seasons. Because pain changes your perspective. When you've spent months feeling lonely, simple conversation becomes precious. When you've spent years feeling uncertain, stability feels luxurious. When you've once cried quietly in a tiny apartment wondering if you belong somewhere, peace suddenly feels bigger than success. That realization grew stronger one Sunday afternoon while we cleaned the apartment together as a family. Music played softly in the background. My husband vacuumed the living room while our child helped by creating additional messes professionally. Very efficient teamwork. At one point, I caught myself laughing so hard at something completely stupid. I think our child had put socks onto a teddy bear and declared it business bear. And suddenly I froze emotionally for a second. Because the sound filling our apartment was not stress anymore. It was joy. Real joy. Not perfect life joy. Not social media happiness. Messy, loud, ordinary joy. And psychologically, those moments matter deeply. Research consistently shows human happiness depends less on constant excitement and more on emotional safety, meaningful relationships, and repeated positive experiences inside daily life. The brain actually adapts quickly to luxury and achievement, but emotional connection continues nourishing mental well-being long-term. Basically, your nervous system cares more about feeling loved than feeling impressive. Which explains why some people living inside giant houses still feel emotionally homeless. And why some tiny apartments quietly become entire worlds. One evening not long after that realization, I found an old notebook hidden inside a kitchen drawer while searching for batteries. My English notebook. The same one from our first years in America. The pages looked worn and bent now. Some sentences were messy. Grammar mistakes covered entire sections. Coffee stains decorated multiple pages like accidental artistic expression. But as I flipped through it slowly, memories flooded back. Vocabulary lists. Practice conversations. Little motivational notes I wrote during difficult nights. And then I found a sentence from long ago. Maybe simple life can still be beautiful. I stared at those words for a long time. Because back then, I wrote them like a question. Now they felt like an answer. The truth is, our apartment never became luxurious. We never transformed into glamorous movie characters with perfect lives and expensive furniture and emotionally stable morning routines. Honestly, some mornings we still looked like exhausted raccoons searching for coffee. But love grew here. Confidence grew here. Our family grew here. Even my English grew here, slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly. And maybe that's why the apartment mattered so much. It witnessed the entire transformation. Not from failure to perfection. From fear to belonging. Huge difference. Later that week, I walked alone to the same coffee shop where I once panicked ordering drinks years earlier. The place looked almost identical. Warm lights. Soft music. People typing on laptops pretending to understand taxes confidently. But this time, when the barista asked how my day was going, I answered naturally. Then something funny happened. A nervous young woman standing behind me struggled slightly while ordering in English. Her hands shook a little. Her pronunciation sounded careful and uncertain in the painfully familiar way I remembered too well. And immediately I recognized that feeling. That fear. That invisible loneliness of trying to build a life inside a language that still doesn't fully feel like home. So before leaving, I smiled gently at her and said, "You're doing great." That's all. Just 4 simple words. But her face softened instantly. And walking home afterward, I realized something powerful. Sometimes healing becomes complete the moment you can give comfort to someone standing where you once stood. That realization stayed with me all evening. Because years earlier, I believed success meant becoming someone completely new. Now I understood something wiser. Success is not becoming another person. It's finally relaxing enough to become yourself fully. Even imperfectly. Especially imperfectly. That night, after dinner, we sat together near the apartment window again. Snow continued falling softly outside while our child slept peacefully nearby. The city lights reflected against the glass. The heater hummed quietly. Somewhere downstairs, neighbors laughed loudly at something we couldn't hear. And suddenly my husband looked around the apartment and smiled. "You know," he said softly, "I think this place gave us everything." I looked around too. The tiny kitchen. The crowded shelves. The old couch where we survived difficult nights together. The walls that once felt painfully close but now somehow felt warm. And honestly, he was right. Because this apartment gave us more than shelter. It gave us perspective. It taught us patience. It taught us how to communicate when life felt hard. How to laugh during stressful seasons. How to grow slowly without giving up. How to build happiness from ordinary moments instead of waiting for perfect circumstances. And maybe that's the real American dream nobody advertises loudly enough. Not endless money. Not giant houses. Not becoming flawless. Just having a safe place where love survives long enough to grow. A place where difficult days don't destroy you. A place where people keep choosing each other anyway. And standing there beside the window, holding warm tea while snow covered the city outside. I finally understood the answer to the question that quietly followed me all these years. Can a simple life bring true happiness? Yes. Sometimes simple life brings the deepest happiness of all. Especially when you stop treating small as the opposite of meaningful. Because the truth is, our apartment was never small. Our dreams were simply learning how to fit inside real life. Sometimes the life that saves you doesn't look impressive at first. Sometimes it looks like a tiny apartment, unfinished English, sleepless nights, cheap coffee, and two tired people trying not to give up on each other. But one quiet day, you suddenly realize something powerful. The dream was never waiting at the finish line. The dream was hiding inside the small moments you almost ignored. So if you're learning English slowly, if you feel behind in life, if you're struggling to survive emotionally, financially, or mentally right now, don't quit too early. Your story may still be building the most beautiful chapter in silence. And maybe years from now, you'll look back at this difficult season and whisper, that was the beginning of everything. If this story touched your heart or helped your English listening practice, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who feels lost or tired today. More slow English stories, real-life conversations, love stories, and inspiring American life lessons are coming soon. Stay here. Keep listening. Keep growing. Because your small life may already hold a very big dream.